see that thing running, means our engine was firing properly. Uh, Still, the anxiety that we used to feel for those launches was just unbearable. I mean, you'd go, I couldn't breathe during one of those launches. The entire launch sequence lasted for, 15 minutes. I'm not sure I breathed at all during that time. Or my heart beat, or whatever. There was too many things could go wrong. And that whole program was designed where individuals felt responsible for their part. Thousands of people that were involved in it would have known by name who was responsible for that failure. And that'd be hard when it's your peers. Most people probably can't imagine how dedicated the people were that were working on that thing. Even before we moved to Sacramento, I'd come up from Huntington Beach to do testing on the test stands for firings or whatever. And I might be up here for 4 or 5 days working around the clock, never even get a motel room. I just worked until they put me on a plane and sent me home. I went to work in 1961, Southern California, in the design phase. And Douglas was a little different than some of the other companies in that they took young engineers and gave them the real difficult problems. If they could solve them, great. If they couldn't, there were a lot of other young engineers that they'd give the thing to. And so I was very fortunate. Got involved in a lot of different design things for the Saturn. I had things that separated the stages. They fired pyrotechnics that actually blew those stages apart. I had equipment that ran the motors that pumped the hydrogen to cool the engine down before it could be restarted. The stage would be built in Huntington Beach, shipped up here, and then it would be put in a stand in the big tall vertical building out there and checked out and modified. We were always modifying them right up to the very end. Each stage would be identified for a particular flight, and the requirements for each flight would be a little different. So every stage was different. It would have minor changes. So it would be modified and tested, and then finally moved down to the beta stand. And when it got down there, it would be actually put on the stand, fueled up, just like a real launch. It would sit there and go through the same sequences that it would do during the first 2 stages burn. And it would be totally on internal power and internal control, and then it would sit there and do its first stage burn, and then sit there for the time for the orbits, and then it would crank up and do the second stage burn. It would do a complete system flight tied to the test stand out there. The biggest part of that stage was that it had to restart from space. It fired its engine one time and went into Earth orbit, and then it sat there in orbit for a few orbits, and then it had to restart its engine, which was a real challenge back then, because a lot of things had to be chilled down. And starting one of those engines is a pretty complex process. So there were a lot of things about it that made it a spacecraft rather than just a booster. And we took a lot of pride in that, as you can imagine. You knew it had to fire like for 5.5 minutes. You knew that going into this thing. And it would start up, and it would start rumbling and shaking, and you could tell how it was getting beat to pieces out there from all that noise and vibration. And you'd think, boy, this 5.5 minutes has got to be up. And you'd look at your watch and it'd be 20 seconds. And you'd just think that 5.5 minutes would never be up. It would make noise and rumble out there so long. You could imagine all kinds of things that could be going wrong. It was a very tense time in the blockhouse. Even at the time, a lot of people didn't know what was going on. You know, people would see the guppy, the pregnant guppy flying up here, and they had no idea what all that was about. Ungainly looking airplane that probably ever flew. But it would pick up those stages in Southern California and fly them out here, and then pick up stages out here and fly them to the Cape. It was an amazing thing. Yeah, we had one stage that it was a titanium pressure bottle that separated. It was a bottle maybe 3 feet in diameter, and it's a really high pressure bottle. And problem with the well, so when it separated, one half of it went up through the common bulkhead that separated the liquid hydrogen from the liquid oxygen. And so you put a 3-foot size section hole in that bulkhead all at once, you get a lot of mixing. And a spectacular explosion. Yeah, it meant that another vehicle had to be shifted into that. It changed the sequence of what vehicles were doing what. And it really impacted the test facility up here because one of our 2 test stands was out of service. And that whole program was on fast track so that, you know, there was always one of them and one stand being checked out while the other one was fired, and it was always, so there was a lot of controversy about whether we would rebuild that stand and have 2 stands or whether we could get through the program with one stand. They decided to rebuild the stand, but we could have probably made it. You know, I'm not sure that the majority of people really knew what was going on out there when it was going on. So they wouldn't miss such a thing. It would be educational if you could have a place people could drive into and read what really happened there. I think that'd be a good idea. Wouldn't take that much land to make it happen. It's funny to me that after all these years, the scheme they're going to use to go to the moon this time is almost exactly the scheme that we used before, but with modern hardware. So I can imagine that a lot of things we did the hard way, they'll do with computers, and it'll be a lot easier. But, you know, the environment's still the same. The hardware's still got to function out there in that tough environment. And I wouldn't mind being young and starting off on that program also. If they'd give me a job, I'd take it. A major part of my life was spent right there. And probably some of the most difficult parts of my life, as well as some of the more rewarding parts of my life. I've been lucky to have 3 careers. And all of them were good and exciting, but there wasn't any of them like the space program. It was by far the best.